Well, welcome to yet another riveting episode of My Dog Will Eat My Face. I, first off, need to do a little house cleaning here. For some oddball reason, it looks like my last podcast got redistributed last night again. I'm not sure if users even really notice it. Well, I take that back because I'm signed in as users in other areas so I can monitor how things come out. And it was kind of a goofy thing. So, I guess one of two things happened. One of two different things happened. Either last week's podcast did not go out for some reason, and everyone's just been sitting there holding an empty sack, or it did go out last week, and then it somehow went out again last night. And then if you did happen to catch it last week and started to listen to it, you'd be saying to yourself, oh, what in the world is this? I've already heard all this. So, there was some strange technical error. So I needed to put that little issue to bed, so to speak, and recreate the intro for what was supposed to be this week's podcast. And I guess just explain why things got a little quirky there. And, well, actually, I'm not even explaining why. I'm just explaining they did. God help me, I don't know why. It's like black magic with some technology, as some of you may know. It just does weird stuff sometimes. So anyway, all that being said, no matter how it affected you, if at all, this podcast that has been distributed that has been distributed now, I should say, is indeed a new podcast. And you can put that in your peace pipe and smoke it if you like. That's what my dad used to always say. I have no clue what it means. I'm probably going to get hate mail now saying it's like some sort of a First Nations issue or something like that. But he would always say that. Put that in your peace pipe and smoke it. And yeah, I don't know what that means. So, I'm off onto a good start. I just might have insulted people and maybe even misquoted somebody, and basically, yeah, I'm starting off just dashingly good. Anyway, I wanted to take a moment to update my subscribers on what's been going on. I know things have been very murky with what's happening to me or with me when it comes to me being in hospice care or being moved to palliative care. Unfortunately, though, I have to say that I will not know probably the final picture until it actually happens. So my current hospice certification expires towards the end of next week on the 18th, actually. And until then, there is just a menagerie of issues and messes and just basically total fusterclucks that are pretty much dragging me down, along with some medical issues that I've been having as of late. So, for example, this last weekend I was pretty much out of commission. I, in fact, had to see an emergency nurse with hospice because I was in such severe pain suddenly. And it was easily a 9 out of 10 in pain, and it was just quite simply unbearable. So an emergency nurse did have to come out and see me late Saturday night this weekend, and even to this moment, my certain parts of my body are very, very ginger. I can tell I'm kind of walking a really fine line here, so I can't push myself too hard, in other words, because I don't want to go down that rabbit hole again of just the extreme pain that I endured. But I did want to give my listeners some sort of an update with what's happening. And I think some of this may be valuable to any of those of you that are currently in hospice care yourself, or you know someone in hospice care, because what's really seemed to happen here is I've had to basically get a new job of understanding the utter mess that the Medicare system has in place right now with respect to hospice care. So it's been basically trying to deal with a lot of what ifs and working through a very thick mud of material where just certain things were absolutely far from clear. And where I had thought we had proposed a somewhat reasonable solution, when I basically came to find out that if that solution was accepted, it would have been actually a very dirty little trick that this hospice medical director was possibly trying to pull on me. So, with all that being said, we, and by we, I mean myself, my sister-in-law, and my brother, and I, we basically got together to meet with, or to have a discussion with my nurse, my hospice nurse, during our regularly planned meeting. And a lot of it was quite literally, as I put it, a come to Jesus moment that needed to be expressed to my hospice team and to the medical director. Because as I waded through all these murky waters of rules and guidelines, whatever you wish to call them, I basically came to certain conclusions that were completely absolute and needed to be conveyed to my hospice provider, no matter the cost. And it's my intention today to try to express what at least some of that, maybe a majority of that if we're lucky, was and what it meant. So again, if you are someone who deals with hospice in any capacity, as someone who's in it, or you know someone who's in it, or maybe even if you're a hospice provider, some of this perspective might be valuable to you, coming from someone who is in hospice at this moment. So, let's now get into that come to Jesus moment and what it is I mean when I said we had to really broach those topics today with my hospice provider. You know, with some of my free time these days, while things may periodically be rather dull, with not much to do, I have actually found some pleasures in watching a lot of things, but among them are police body cam issues. And I really don't get into them for any sort of exciting events. To me, it's just watching people do some of the dumbest things imaginable to get themselves into this kind of trouble. And obviously, I'm not saying all people who get in trouble with cops is stupid or something like that. No. I just like watching the videos where the alleged perpetrator just did some really, or said some really stupid things that just made everything worse for themselves. Occasionally I'll come across a police, body cam video where the perp is not dumb and normal and handles it well, just like any attorney would tell you how to handle it. And there's no issue to those, but they're also extraordinarily boring. So I'd like to watch the videos that are out there that are just I don't know, just chaos and almost like a really bad daytime TV. So I think this has become my version of Jerry Springer or something, or Judge Judy, I don't know. But anyway, I'm not here to talk about my YouTube viewing experiences, but hey, if any of you think that would be something worth to mention, let me know, and I'd be more than happy to tell you about my strange array of viewing habits. Anyway, the reason why I bring this up is because every once in a while, you will hear the alleged perpetrator say 3 little words. I'm sorry. Wait, is it 3? Yes, it is 3 little words. Sorry. I know. Oh, it's 4. I can't count between 3 and 4. I'm turning into King Arthur from Monty Python and the Quest for the Grail. 1, 2, 3, 5. Oh, wait, no. 1, 2, 5. 3, so 3. Anyway, I'll edit all that out later. Don't worry. That's all just a bunch of gobbledygook that I can edit out later. But when I hear these words, okay, it's 4 words, not 3. when they say, I know my rights, pretty much very close to 100% of the time. I mean, of all the examples I've seen, I think it is 100%, but I'm only allowing for a little bit of air of that one or two out there that don't quite qualify. But essentially, what I often see, nearly that 100% of the time, I would say 99.99% of the time, when they say those words, they don't know their rights the slightest bit. And they just continue to make their situation so much worse and just stack charges after charges after charges. And they all forget the golden rule, right? I'm sure all of you have heard the golden rule. And class, what is the golden rule? That's right. Don't commit a felony in an attempt to get out of a misdemeanor. That's the golden rule. Don't commit a felony to get out of a misdemeanor. That's the golden rule that everyone should live by. But no, these people don't do that. And they clearly don't know their rights whatsoever. But the reason why I bring this up is knowledge is power. Through your knowledge of your rights, of a lot of different things where this is a factor. But your knowledge alone will give you an edge over the competition and over others that do not have the same prowess as you might have. And therefore, you are more inclined to succeed at what it is you are trying to succeed at. But far too often, I guess, people say they know their rights when they just don't. And it just makes it 100 times worse for them. They stack charges like you can't believe, and their misconceptions of the justice system and what they can do, what they can't do. It's just mind-boggling. But all that aside, the reason why I bring this up is through the course of this hospice / potential palliative care debacle that I've been forced into, I've learned that the more, just like everything else, the more you know, the better off you are. And when you become aware of what your rights are as a patient, you have got to have the drive to really protect those rights. And that's what I've found. And that's what today's meeting with my hospice nurse was about. All this is triggered by their new medical director who just blabbed on and on upon our very first meeting, her second week on the job, about the federal guidelines in Medicare and how it is so incredibly regulated. It's probably the most regulated component of medical care that they've ever dealt with, is what they'd say. Now, I gotta tell you, I've seen the so-called Medicare guidelines for hospice, and part one is I don't know why they call them guidelines. I would think if they're just guidelines, if you're just close enough, that's pretty good. But there's no real punishing authority anyway, even if you fail to meet those guidelines. Perhaps you might be found outside of best practices in a larger group that's used to identify good providers or providers that are compliant with their own rules, perhaps. In my universe, such a thing did exist way back in the day. And they were aptly called guidelines, and we touted them that we follow those guidelines as a means to say, hey, we are part of this group that can demonstrate we practice best practices when it comes to what it is that we do. And you can trust us as an active participant within the organization that made these guidelines and as an adherent to those guidelines. And when you're doing B2B business, B2B sales, so to speak, that can matter quite a bit to another business. So, in my career history, that's how I understand guidelines. But it's funny. I decided to Google it, and I looked up the Medicare hospice guidelines. If you scrap out the various forms used that they recommend you, well, not recommend, I guess, that they say you have to use, which again, and these aren't guidelines anymore. These now sound like rules. It just kind of boggles my mind that they're called guidelines. Anyway, the whole thing's one page. This is completely adherable. It is a federal guideline that is one page and universally adhered to across all 50 states of these United States of America. To me, in my career history, that's a walk in the park. That's playing with a beach ball with your kids on a sunny day, on white sand beaches. It's nothing. It is absolutely nothing. It is not terrifying. It is not unwieldy. It is not the worst thing in the universe. And for them to make it out like this Freddy Krueger boogeyman, almost said booger man. Either way, a booger man or a boogeyman, you don't want to deal with either of those. But it's not. It's thankfully not that. Now, in my career, I had a slew of federal laws that I and my company were responsible for complying with. Some of these laws even had personal right of private action, which means you as a consumer could even sue particular companies in some cases if they did not adhere to those rules. And you could even sue them for twice damages if they knowingly did not adhere to those rules. But but there's that, and just that one example, that's like a 400-page bill. Okay. And then there's other bills, each one hundreds of pages, okay? So I dealt with, maybe I would say about half a dozen, I guess, major at least, federal legislative laws that regulated what we did. There were also international laws established by the European Union, especially with respect to security and privacy, that needed to be adhered to if you ever passed consumer data to Europe or vice versa. And a lot of these laws contradict each other, and there's a lot of it depends throughout interpretation of these laws. So much of it is dependent upon such specific variables, especially when you're getting into spheres of influence and you're looking like at a Venn diagram of different laws and you see that they cross over. Do they contradict? At face value, they might. But if you drill down closer, you sort of realize it depends. Which is an answer everybody hates on if they can do something. But the best short answer always is, it depends. Anyway, that's what I dealt with in my career. I've had to deal with FBI search warrants. I had to deal with Secret Service search warrants. I've testified in court. I've argued for my company in court. I've dealt with litigation, discovery, depositions, the whole 9 yards of that. I even had an attorney general, I'm not going to say who, but someone from the East Coast of the United States, threatened me with an indictment by a federal jury if I did not give her what she wanted. And all I could say to her, frankly, was, okay, if you feel you have to do that, then by all means do that. So, this one page of federal guidelines, still a name that I need to do more research on. As much mud and gunk as I've gone through with this as it relates to hospice, I really want to get to understand the penalties of not following the guidelines. And if there are penalties, who's enforcing them? And if it's Medicare or another government agency enforcing them, why in the world are they called guidelines? There's got to be a really good story there. I just know it. And I'm a total legal nerd, I admit. I'm a nerd with many things, but I am a legal nerd. I also watch court cases on YouTube for fun. But yeah, I would love to know the etymology of guidelines with this and what that means, where it came from, and enforcement, jurisdiction, by who, by what agencies, what penalties, etc. Anyway, bottom line, the one page of guidelines does not make me quake in my boots. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. And for these hospice people to constantly tout their federal guidelines as though they are, I don't know, the eye itself above the uncompleted pyramid of man's progress. It's just asinine to me. It doesn't spook me. Anyway, it spooks hospice workers, though, to the bone, so there's something there. I'm just not sure yet what. And this is all going to come down to one thing. This 22 minutes of me ranting is going to come down to one lesson I have learned. For anyone who is in hospice, who is thinking about hospice, who knows someone in hospice, who knows if someone is thinking about hospice, and so on, the number one suggestion I can have, and it's totally not legal advice, it's because it will make your life dealing with them a lot simpler. But unlike every case in my police videos where they state they know their rights when they clearly don't know anything, you need to know your rights in hospice. And what's far more is you've got to be willing to defend them. I'll touch a little bit more on that as to why I'm saying that. But make sure, if you're anywhere near hospice or palliative care even, you thoroughly know what your rights are. if you have someone in your life who has a medical power of attorney, as I do, and I also think is a very good idea, I not only have a living will, I have a medical power of attorney with someone who I trust very much, and we drafted it together with full understanding. And if you have a similar power of medical attorney with someone, they need to know your rights as a patient and not be afraid to exercise them. And I will tell you as best I can, I suppose, time permitting. Too late, right? Time permitting, I will try to say why that's so important, and I'm going to use myself and my experience as recently as today as the example of why it's so important to know your rights and to exercise them. So, what does this have to do with hospice exactly? And it might seem rather nebulous at first, but I am going to describe one of the issues I was trying to navigate with my hospice situation. And then learning that it was essentially self-sabotage. And I had to turn around and say, there's no way I'm now doing that. That was part of my come to Jesus meeting today with my own hospice nurse. She's just a poor middle person in this, and so I don't necessarily blame her per se, of course. My issue is with the doctor, who's, I feel, a complete imbecile. But beyond that, anyway, so I'll try to explain it as quickly as I can. My current certification period for being in hospice expires April 18th, 2024. Now, she said, again, this is the doctor, medical director, that she doesn't feel safe renewing my certification, even though it's been renewed without any issue like this for actually quite a long time. I'm not making it up, about 4.5 years. That's a long time in hospice, so they start to freak out about that. Now, their terrifying guidelines document illustrates that the period of being in hospice can be renewed as many times as necessary. But within each certification period, there still needs to be some sort of sign of continuing decline and not stability and not getting better. Okay? So that's usually what they refer to in there. So, she wanted more data, she said, before I could really be recertified. So, excuse me, she tried to push for me to get an appointment and an echocardiogram with my cardiologist, who is quite a ways away. I mean, he's 40 minutes, I'd say, in a huge hospital complex. It's like its own city, my God. And I've been there many times before, and this is actually a man who I really do trust quite a bit. He's actually saved my life, I would say, at least twice. And he is one of the very few medical practitioners, maybe the only, who I implicitly and explicitly trust with my life. And I do mean that. He's earned it, because I am here still talking to you today. And he did interventions to improve my situation as best as he could in the past, and he allowed me to live longer. He was, though, the one that also moved me to hospice, because there reached a point when there was really nothing more than that they can do. And I even asked him in writing, right away, believe it or not, is if there are any new treatments available, that would be an option. And the truth is, I asked for a number of reasons, because if there were, that's a whole different game. If there was something else on the table that I could try to improve my life in my physical being, oh, you betcha, I'd be on that like white on rice. That's a game changer. So, just for my own sake, there's a good desire to know the answer to that. But one of the things the medical director at my hospice said to my face, I don't know, I can't remember if it was before or after she got my name wrong, but she said something to the effect of, well, perhaps it'd be better that you go into palliative care to where you can still get aggressive treatment. And I was just kind of like, well, golly, I never thought of that before. I mean, give me a break. She's anyway, I gotta stop my emotional disdain for her lack of frontal lobe. Anyway, she continued and said, now, if there are no new treatments, then it kind of just rolls back to us in hospice. Those were her, I want to say exact words, but if they're not exact, they're very close. Extraordinarily close. And that was the other reason why I asked my cardiologist that. And so, with no new procedures to help me, number one, what in God's name is the point of the echo and the clinic visit? Is it just a waste of everyone's time? And the good doctor apparently just lied through her teeth to me, because I said I have it in writing, even from my cardiologist, that there are no new procedures. Your words were that then it rolls back to hospice if there isn't. Well, there you go. Sounds like we just solved that dilemma, didn't we? Guess not. I don't even remember the response because I was so angry. Because all what I heard was, I lied, and I lied. And I would say anything to just get you out of my service. Because I am the new big scary medical director. And I need people to find out that I'm here now. And you are one of my sacrificial lambs. That's all she could have. She might as well should have just said that. Because that's almost a good paraphrase of whatever response she did cop up. Of course, followed again, though, by, I lied, and I lied. So, I really don't trust this woman any further that I could throw her. Because she still wants that done. Super. Now, the first I can get in as expedited as possible. And the expedition on this is actually pretty extraordinary for such a major hospital to bump me forward so much, is to go in and get both the echo and a clinic visit done on the 22nd. No regard for the fact that I'm physically much weaker than I ever was before. I'd have to lug around probably 4 cylinders of oxygen just to get there and home. I'd have to also steal their oxygen out of the wall, I guess, of various rooms, and somehow get that set up. And it is just I don't have a car. I got rid of my car because I was, and still am, fainting occasionally with no warning. Could you imagine if I was driving a 40,000-pound piece of steel and metal down a major road? And perfectly sober and all the right intentions in my mind, suddenly pass out for maybe only a moment, and I hit a child. Could you imagine? For me, that would be it. My life would be over. At that point, I would gladly accept death in any form it could come. It would absolutely ruin me. What if I hit someone's little girl? Because I passed out. And not even that. What if I hit a dog? I'm a dog lover, obviously. That alone, I don't think I'd manage that. I don't want that. Ever. So, I sold my car. For a loss. But I absolutely had to remove the chance of that ever happening. So anyway, not only do I not have a car, I have to travel a pretty long distance. I have to carry approximately 3 very heavy canisters of oxygen. I don't know if you've ever carried them before, but they are really heavy. Really heavy. And this facility, like I said, is an enormous... It's like its own city. And navigating it, as weak as I am, obviously I'm going to request a wheelchair. But then after that, I'd also have to be put into some random room where I can suck on their oxygen there on the wall. Because that's the only way probably I'd be able to survive. So, our first proposal was to go ahead and do a recertification renewal next week on the 18th, knowing that the cardiology visit and echo is planned. But the problem with hospice and Medicare is you cannot go anywhere where it could be deemed as treatment, or I think even just discovery. Certainly treatment, but I think even discovery. Because in Medicare's mind, you're now double dipping in your insurance. You're using your Medicare, or excuse me, you're using your hospice benefit, and then using the hospital benefit for additional evaluation. And why bother doing additional evaluation if this person is already expected to be dying. Which is another good point. This is a condition that's been with me, frankly, for all my life. It's not going away. It's not getting better. It's just completely asinine for this to even happen. To be perfectly blunt, it is useless in every possible way. One, it probably won't find anything new or different. Maybe might find things worse. And two, there's nothing they can do about it. God. So it's just a total scam as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, the only way I'd be able to have Medicare pay for that visit is I would have to do a voluntary discharge from hospice the Sunday before the 22nd. So I could then go to the hospital and do that and then return and then re-enter hospice. But here's the thing. If I do a voluntary discharge, and actually I only found this out recently. If I do a voluntary discharge, I will lose my right to appeal the decision for an involuntary discharge. And based off experience up to now, I have no faith nor belief whatsoever that I would be able to do a voluntary discharge and expect them to then re-enroll me into hospice. Because then if they don't and say, oh, well, yeah, we think this shows that we aren't for you, we're going to move you along to palliative care or Scooby-Doo's house. I don't know. I have no faith or belief that they would ever do that. And instead, this is why I was mentioning know your rights. I would have given up my right to appeal the decision to forcibly discharge me. And so, in today's little come to Jesus meeting, I had to say to my nurse to tell the good doctor that I will not ever do a voluntary discharge because I will not give up my right to appeal, and I promise you I will appeal. And if that appeal is won, I will not continue to the appointment because it only takes 72 hours. So it's cutting it pretty short. And at that time even, I might not be fully out of hospice, actually. I need to reread that component. So no matter what, I would not be able to do that. Maybe. I don't know. I'm gonna have to look more into that. And this, my friends, is where we come full circle and you realize why I said you have to be unlike those dumb criminals on cop videos, on their body cam and dash cam videos, when they all yell out, "I know my rights," when in fact, all the time they don't know anything. Know your rights. Read about them or have some advocate for you do that if you can't. Know your rights and don't be afraid to exercise them. So after all that, where does that leave me? As of the date of me recording this podcast, I am indeed still in hospice. I shall have to wait and see what is done on the 19th. And depending upon that, I will either keep or be forced to cancel the appointment with my cardiologist. I did say that I would still see the cardiologist if Medicare refused to pay, but my hospice provider promises to pay for anything that is otherwise denied by Medicare, since it is them who wanted these tests and this discussion in the first place. It only seems fair. But we shall see if that really even goes anywhere. Further, once I give a appeal to a non-voluntary discharge, in general, the responsible agency would have to return notice of whichever decision they make to both myself and the hospice team. If I am to be reinstated before the 22nd, then unfortunately for them, again though, unless they promise otherwise, as my hospice team promises otherwise, I will have to cancel the appointment with my cardiologist. And of course, if they deny my request to appeal, then I'll go ahead and proceed with the the clinic visit and the echocardiogram, and then probably ask my cardiologist for a new hospice referral to a different agency, because I mean, at least most likely that's what I'm going to do, because that would allow me to start the clock all over again and also be with the provider whom I can trust. I've said before, with this new medical director, I would not trust her any further, and I could throw her. She's asked leading questions to me that were very slanted and irresponsible, honestly. She was only with the company for 2 weeks when she met me, and as it seems to me, she had already made up her decision. And I actually expressed that very thing to my nurse today. I said, I firmly believe that her decision was made before she didn't ask. Do I think I've progressed at all? Do I think I'm getting better, worse? General questions that a new director of medicine might want to ask of a new person they've never met before, but rather asked absolutely none of that. And immediately, and ever since, just dives into her precious and terrifying as they are federal guidelines. The only question directed to me was entirely misleading and absolutely inappropriate. She asked me, if you lived to September, would you be surprised to still be alive? And I said, yes, I actually would be. I am surprised every day I wake up. I've had this congenital problem my entire life. And I knew from a child that my life expectancy was not going to be great. They could be wrong, as they have been about so many other things, especially with respect to my health. But the fact of the matter is, I'm thankful every morning I wake up. Surprised? Sure, I'm a little surprised. But more than anything, just thankful. What she asked was inappropriate. It was leading, trying to get me to basically say no and agree with her. So, I guess it's going to continue to be a rocky few weeks for me, and we shall indeed see what happens. Finally, I'm going to touch on one last other topic here related to all these events that have been occurring in my life. Needless to say, it's been utterly exhausting. And I really feel as though everyone, from the people at my cardiologist's office to my hospice provider, my social worker in particular, who's a complete guts. Maybe one day I'll talk about that too. That'd be a whole other episode. A person who's supposed to help me and is about as useless as you could ever possibly imagine. I can't even think of a good simile to express the gravity and the amassed amount of uselessness that this person brings to the table. Oh, and I get to see that person tomorrow. Yay! Won't that be heaps of fun? Fun, fun, fun. That's all I do is have fun. And at one point in today's call, discussion with my nurse, she was with me, but we also called in my brother, my medical power of attorney and my sister-in-law, who I am very close to. I, at one point, started actually to break down and cry. I felt, and in a lot of ways I still do feel, that nobody seems to care. At all. And what they don't care about, frankly, is it's just me. Or my well-being. Of course, my brother and sister-in-law and father and my dog most of all care for me. I'm not saying it like that. But it's been such a battle between the cardiologist team and back to this imbecile doctor, frankly, who basically just swooped in my life and very diligently made me as miserable as she could. She was like, back in the day, we would describe seagull bosses. Some of you may have heard that when someone says that so-and-so in management is just like a seagull boss. What they do is they fly in and crap on everything and fly away. And you're just left there to clean up the mess. And that's really what I was beginning to feel like. It was just like no one gave a hoot about what all these events and changes they were talking about were going to do to me. I really have been overwhelmed, to be honest. Yesterday, I was on the phone dealing with all of this stuff from 9 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. And later today, I have to deal with some more stuff. And it's what's really shocked me is these are medical practitioners. And they treat it like they just don't care. They dump all this stuff on me that I have to manage somehow and navigate through things that I've never been trained on, and realize that as I do learn things, they were deceiving me, lying to me, and even potentially asking me to give up my rights that I did have. When these are the people you're supposed to trust. These are the ones you trust your life with. Explicitly, that's what they do. And lately, it's just been piling on and piling on. And whatever I got back from anyone, from people at the cardiologist hospital to probably most of my hospice providers, is frankly just sorry. I in some ways I lost my train of thought there because I get so overwhelmed with the amount of stuff they just pile on me, and the outward lack of the slightest amount of empathy. I mean, for God's sakes, back in June and into July, I was held against my will in a nursing home because I didn't even remember suddenly who I was. My mind just was gone. To this day, we got some maybe theories, but we really don't know why. In that event, even though it's beyond this 3-month federal guideline BS that the doctor keeps throwing at me, happened as recently as into July. And that was the most extreme and terrifying event of my entire life. And the medical director just dismissed it because it didn't happen recently enough. Well, it was recent enough for me. And I don't care what your federal guidelines say. They're wrong. It's just what they're doing is simply wrong. So, yeah, there did come a point today where I started to say I just feel like everyone is just piling all this stuff on me. When, for God's sakes, I'm not what I would call a top performer right now. I suffer from extreme fatigue and weakness. And even today, when the nurse was here, I almost fell flat on my face, but more specifically into my wine rack covered with wine glasses and decanters and cocktail glasses, because I lost my ability to walk and almost fell and just barely caught myself. Barely caught myself. In between all that, this medical director has the gall to say, well, in the first case, it was too long ago. Not to me it was. It scares me to death daily still. In the fall today, I'm sure I'll never hear about it. So, they forcibly discharged me after I saved myself from smashing my face as I fell in front of the nurse. Today, if I'm then kicked out, then yes, what you're doing, you medical people, providers, whatever, hospice providers, is morally reprehensible. And your federal guidelines are so myopic that it makes them basically useless. So, At one point today during our discussion, I actually did break down and start to cry. But I did pull it together a little bit, but that's how it's been for me. So I decided to talk last today about my fifis, which is something I normally don't get largely into. But to me, as far as I'm concerned, these, I almost said this, but it's these attitudes from people who are supposed to help me are just egregious beyond words. So, I have to admit, it's been pretty hard for me. And it's not going to be better any time soon. Well, I think I have gone on long enough today, my friends. I really would love to not deal with anything tomorrow at all and just have a day to wallow in my own crapulence with my loving, special little dog, who, by the way, this last weekend was a real trooper for me when I was in so much pain. Again, I was in so much pain at times. I was screaming and had to see an emergency nurse. And my little man at one point started really whining and then crying. Just scared because of what I was going through. And he would look up at me with these big, brown, loving eyes. But they were concerned eyes. I could tell he was giving me a very worried look. When he's thinking about something, which he often does, because he's a smarty pants, I guess he forms wrinkles like on the top of his head when he's really thinking about something. So he had that going on while giving me a really puppy-eyed, worried look. And I told him, "Don't worry, buddy. I promised you I would never leave you." And when that emergency nurse proposed going to the emergency room, I flatly said, "I can't leave my dog." And I put my hand on him, and he seemed to act like he knew what I was saying. I'll tell you, if it was just me, no dog, no nothing, I would have taken that offer right away and gone to the emergency room. Because I was in such dire straits. I would have been game on for that. But I couldn't leave my dog. And I think when I did that, I could almost feel like a relief come off of him and how he was holding himself. His muscles weren't as badly clenched. So, I am thankful, believe me, for having such a wonderful person in my life. I call him a person. He's a non-human person. That's what I say. Sorry. A lot of people might not like that, but I say no. You spend a week with him, you'll know he's a non-human person. But even with all this going on, and my pooch doing the best he can, who is a licensed emotional support animal, or ESA, by the way. He is fully licensed as a support animal. And my God, he takes that job role so seriously. As I already described, he is gung-ho to be the best ESA the planet had ever seen. Anyway. I'm thankful so much that at least I do have that. And of course, when I feel like everything's being dumped on me at the worst time possible, I do get some support, thankfully, from family, friends as well. But it's still very hard. And at times, I really do feel like I'm the most alone person in the world. I really do. But then, I'm reminded of what Ibsen wrote many, many years ago. The strongest man in the world is he who is most alone. So, that little parcel of old wisdom can also give me some solace. But anyway, if you've listened this far to this podcast, which has gone way over what I was expecting it to go in terms of time. Sorry about that. I was a little emotional over the subject. What can I say? But in all honesty, if you made it this far, my gosh, thank you so much. I dearly thank you for taking the time to listen to my incessant babbling. It is by far one of the best ways you can support me. But since this podcast has already gone on long enough, I'm going to do all of you a really nice favor. I am going to do just a no BS outro and call it